His papers said the orchard could be sold. Her jar said something older was still waiting to be heard. In that quiet room, one woman had to ask, how many names can a family bury before the truth comes back? Is this supposed to stave the orchard? P.T. Collins said it loud enough for half the fall market to hear. Maddie had been lining jars along the folding table to make the display look less like a last-minute apology and more like something her mother might have done with pride. Apple butter in squat jars, pickled okra in taller ones, peach preserves with plain paper labels she had written that morning in a careful hand. Behind her, the old packing shed sat with its side door half open, and beyond it the orchard rolled down the hill in tired rows. He did not answer Pete right away. That was one thing Atlanta had taught her. When a man wanted a crowd, he should not be given one too easily. But Pete already had his crowd. A few farmers stood by the produce crates. Two older women stopped beside the table of hand-sewn aprons. A delivery truck idled near the side of the shed, waiting on a man loading empty boxes. People in a small town did not need an invitation to watch a family argument. They only needed to hear the first sharp word. Pete lifted the papers in his hand and shook them once, as if the sound of paper could settle the matter. Your mama tried this for years, he said. Sweet jars, sweet stories, a dime of sense behind any of it. Now you come home from the city and think you're going to fix it in one Saturday afternoon. A thin laugh moved through part of the crowd. Not cruel from everyone, then it was uncomfortable. Some of it was uncomfortable. Some of it came from people who had known Caroline May and did not know where to place their eyes now that her daughter was standing in the same spot. Maddie felt the heat rise under her collar. She had told herself she was here to sell what could be sold, count what could be counted, and decide what to do before Pete pushed the whole place through a sale. That was the sensible thing, the clean thing. Come back to defend her mother's reputation to people who had already made up their minds. Still, her hand closed around one of the jars. It was cool and heavy. The glass steadied her palm. These were in the shed, he said. They're still good. People used to buy them. People used to do a lot of things, Pete said. His smile widened and the papers lifted again. They used to think this orchard could carry a family too, yes. Inez Walker stood near the shed door, with her trousers folded tight to mutt. It was older than Maddie remembered, though Inez had always been the kind of woman who could make a kitchen obey her without raising her voice. That morning, Pete had told her she no longer needed to come in. Not until the estate was settled. Not until grown business was finished. Inez had said nothing, but the way she watched the shed made Maddie feel as if someone had locked a person out of her own house. Pet stepped closer to the table. I've got buyers who can put real money into this land, he said. Weekend cabins, a space, maybe a tasting room if they feel nostalgic. That's what this place is worth now. Not this, he pointed at the jars. Not leftovers. Maddie lifted the jar before she knew she meant to. For one clean second, it seemed to hold still. Pete with the papers, the crowd with their half-formed judgments, Inez in the shed doorway, and Maddie standing behind a table of jars that suddenly felt like witnesses. This was my mother's work, he said. Her voice did not break, but it came close. Pete's laughter was quick and bright. That's exactly the problem, Maddie. Your mother's work left taxes, bills, and a building nobody knows what to do with. The words struck harder than she wanted them to. Not because Pete was kind, he had never been that, but because some part of Maddie had feared he was right. He had spent years feeling ashamed when people spoke of Caroline May as good-hearted but impractical, generous but foolish, the kind of woman who could feed everyone except her own future. Maddie hated that shame. She hated herself more for having carried it. She set the jar down carefully. I'm not signing anything today, she said. Pete's face did not change, but something sharpened behind his eyes. You don't have to sign today, he said, resoundingly. The papers are moving with or without your mood. He turned then, giving the crowd one more easy smile, and walked away with the sale documents tucked under his arm. The people drifted after that. Few bought jars out of politeness. A few asked quiet questions, Maddie did not have the strength to answer. By the time the last customer left, sun had dropped behind the orchard, and the air had turned cool enough to make the glass jars sweat under her fingers. Inez helped her carry the unsold jars inside. Neither of them spoke at first. The shed smelled faintly of sugar, vinegar, wood, and dust. The long work tables were still there. So were the old shelves, the wash sink, the dented stools, and the back room where Caroline May had kept boxes of jars, labels, twine, lids, and handwritten ledgers no one had opened in years. Maddie put a crate down harder than she meant to. Inez, she said, if there's something here worth saving, need to see it. Not memories, not stories. Something real. Liz looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes moved toward the back room, then away. Your mama kept things in order, she said. That's not an answer. No, Inez said softly. I suppose it isn't. Maddie waited. Inez only took off her apron, folded it once, and laid it on the corner of the table. The gesture was so final that Maddie felt another small ache open in her chest. After Inez left, Maddie stayed. She told herself she was only doing an inventory. That was all. Shelves, jars, empty crates, old labels, anything that might matter before Pete could claim there was nothing but junk. She found boxes of lids, brittle rubber rings, back of paper labels, and 3 crates shoved beneath a workbench in the back room. The jars inside were different. No labels, no product names, no neat handwriting from that morning, just clear glass, sealed tight, each one, holding preserves or vegetables darkened by time. At first she thought they were mistakes, things her mother had never finished. Then she noticed the marks, small numbers, written low on the glass near the base, had letters beside them, not prices, not batch dates. Not anything she recognized from the labeled jars on the shelves. Maddie took one to the work table and held it under the hanging bulb. The little code sat there, for sound, stubborn and precise, as if it had been waiting for someone to stop, being embarrassed long enough to look. She pulled another jar from the crate, another code, then another. By the time she had 6 jars lined in front of her, Dee's anger had gone quiet. In its place came something colder and more alert. Her mother had not marked things carelessly. Caroline May had labeled flower jars, garden rows, holiday boxes, and even spare buttons. There were codes on these jars. They meant something. Maddie reached for the paper labels stacked nearby and compared them one by one. None matched. Not one. By morning, the 6 jars were still on the work table. He had left them there overnight. Because moving them felt like admitting she understood what they were. And she did not. The codes sat near the bottom of the glass, small and neat, each one written with the kind of care her mother used, for things she meant to find again. Not prices, not dates, not anything that belonged on a shelf. Inez came in through the side door just after sunrise, carrying her purse in both hands, as if she had not decided whether she was staying. Maddie was already at table. Do you know what these mean? She asked. Inez looked at the jars, then at the floor. That's your mama's hand. You know that. She marked a lot of things. Not like this. Inez pressed her lips together. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight. It had the shape of something being held back. Picked up one jar and turned it so the little code faced them both. This one says HP12. This one says LW7. This one has BR and a mark I can't read. They're not batch numbers. They're not labels. So what are they? Inez reached toward the jar, then stopped before her fingers touched the glass. I don't know enough to tell it right, she said. That was the first answer that sounded like an answer. Biddy watched her aunt's face and felt her own impatience soften into something less certain. Inez was not being careless. She was afraid. Not of Maddie, exactly. Of opening a door that had stayed shut too long. Tell me who does, Maddie said. Inez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Helen Price might. The Price farm sat beyond the last curve of the orchard road field, where the hills began to rise and the fields narrowed into strips of tired pasture. Helen did not invite Maddie in at first. She stood on her porch with one hand on the screen door, and at the jar Maddie held, like it might ask for more than she wanted to give. I didn't come to ask for money, Maddie said. Helen's eyes sharpened. Then don't start by sounding like your uncle. The words. The word stung because Maddie knew she had a question shaped too much like a claim. She lowered the jar. I'm trying to understand what my mother kept, she said. That's all. Helen looked past her toward the road and back at the glass. Your mother never kept what wasn't hers, she said. That sentence changed the air between them. Maddie followed Helen into a small kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and apples. On the table sat the jar beside a chipped sugar bowl. She did not touch it right away. The peaches in that one were mine, Helen said at last. Maddie blinked. Yours? From the back trees. Too spotted for the market, too good for the hogs. Helen gave a dry little smile, though there was no humor in it. Your mother said ugly fruit had more sense than pretty fruit. Pretty fruit got looked at. Ugly fruit got used. Maddie waited. Helen opened a drawer and took out an old paper label, folded once and kept flat inside a recipe card. The paper had browned at the edges. At the bottom, written small, was the same HP mark. She paid me fair, Helen said. Charity. Not a favor. Fair. Then when the jars sold, there was sometimes a little more. A little more what? Helen's face closed. Ask Inez. By late afternoon, Maddie was in Noah Briggs's small office with 3 jars, Helen's old label, and a notebook full of questions she could not make. Line up, and Noah listened without interrupting. He had the calm face of someone who knew bad news usually arrived, wearing somebody else's hope. These marks might show a pattern, he said. Might? Maddie, a jar and an old label don't stop a land sale. I'm not asking them to stop anything. I'm asking what they point to. Noah leaned back. They point to records, if records exist. Receipts. A ledger. Some kind of agreement. Without that, Pete can call it family habit, kitchen notes, anything he wants. Hearing Pete's name pulled the whole day back into her chest. The papers, the laughter. The people had looked at her as if she had inherited not land, but embarrassment. There is a ledger, she said. She did not know it until she said it, but her mother had kept records for everything. Flour, lids, bushels, the other. If Caroline May had marked jars with initials, she had written the meaning somewhere. Noah's expression shifted, not into belief, but into attention. Then find it before your uncle files anything else. Back at the shed, evening had settled into the corners. Inez was there, though she had said she might not come. She stood near the shelves with her coat still on, looking at the open crates as if they had begun speaking without permission. He placed Helen's old label on the table. She said the peaches were hers, Maddie said. Inez closed her eyes. She kept that? She kept it folded in a recipe card. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Maddie went to the back cabinet and began pulling drawers, paper labels, string, old order slips, a stack of envelopes. Nothing. She worked faster, then stopped herself, afraid of tearing something that mattered. Inez watched until the watching became too much. It won't be theirs, she said. Maddie turned. Inez walked to the lowest shelf beneath the window, knelt with effort, and felt behind a loose board. From the space behind it, he drew out a worn ledger with a faded cloth cover. Maddie stared at it. You knew. I knew some, Inez said. Her voice had gone thin. Not enough to know how to fix it. Maddie opened the ledger. First pages were filled with her mother's handwriting. Names, initials, bushels, jars, small dollar amounts, notes beside them. Helen Price, LWBR, her names she had seen on mailboxes all her life, and never once connected to the jars on those shelves. Her throat tightened. What was this? She asked. Inez stood beside her, one hand resting on the table for balance. For it wasn't just her selling preserves, she said. Your mama made shares. Not with money, with fruit, beans, tomatoes, whatever the women could bring when they had no cash and no say in the farm books. He looked down at the initials again. They were no longer marks. They were people. Inez swallowed hard. Those codes weren't for customers, honey. They were pieces of what those women put in, pieces your mother meant to give back. The ledger stayed open on the work table long after Inez finished speaking. Maddie did not touch it at first. She only looked at the names, the initials, these small amounts written in her mother's careful hand. They were not large numbers. Nothing on those pages looked powerful enough to stop Pete, or a land contract, or a judge in a quiet county room. Every line had a person behind it, and that made the book feel heavier than any deed Pete had waved in her face. By noon, Maddie, Inez, and Noah had spread the first pieces across the old packing table. The coded jars, Ben's folded label, the ledger, a few old slips tucked between pages, each one marked with bushels, jars, and tiny payments. Noah stood with his sleeves rolled up, sorting the papers into small piles. "It's a trail," he said. "Clean one yet?" Maddie looked at him. "But a trail, yes," he said. "And Pete will call it kitchen bookkeeping, unless we'll find people willing to say what it meant." Inez lowered her eyes. That was the hard part. Paper could sit still and be examined. People had to decide whether to stand up after years of keeping quiet. They started with Helen. Her kitchen was warmer than the shed, but not easier. Princess sat at her table, with the old label between her fingers, rubbing the edge as if she could wear the years off it. "I don't want charity written into this," she said. "No one is asking you to say you were helped," he answered. "I'm asking you to say you contributed." Helen looked up then. That word changed something. Contributed. Not received. Not owed. Not pitied. Maddie slid the ledger page across the table. Initials were there, beside a note in Caroline May's handwriting. Peaches, back trees. Spoiled skin, good flesh. Share held. Helen read it once, then again. Her mouth tightened, but her chin lifted. "You wrote it like that?" She did. For a long moment Helen said nothing. Then she rose, went to a cabinet, and took down a small tin. Inside were 3 brown slips, folded flat and kept with the same care as her label. "Husband never cared. What happened to the back trees?" she said. Your mama'd." By the time Maddie left, Helen had agreed to come to the hearing if the papers still looked strong by morning. That was not a promise to save them, but it was the first yes. The next hours moved through kitchens, porches, and back rooms where older women brought out scraps of paper from recipe boxes and dresser drawers. Some remembered exact crops. Some remembered only that Caroline May had paid fair when no one else would. A few would not speak at all. One woman shook her head before Maddie finished explaining, saying it was too late to stir up family business. Or handed over an old receipt, but would not let her name be used. Shied. Maddie did not push. Each refusal hurt, but it also made the women who did agree feel braver. By evening, she understood something her mother must have known. Violence was not always weakness. Sometimes it was what people used to survive, a life where their work was counted only after someone else signed the check. Back at the shed, the table filled slowly. Put the ledger at the center. Beside it, he laid Helen's label, the receipts, and 3 coated jar lids Inez found in a drawer. Inez moved carefully around the room, opening places she had once avoided. Each drawer seemed to cost her something. "I should have told you sooner," she said. Maddie did not look up from the papers. "Why didn't you?" Inez held a bundle of old notices against her chest. "Because when your mama passed," Pete said, "none of it mattered anymore. He said there was no point embarrassing folks over pennies." Maddie's hand stopped. "Notices?" Inez set the bundle down. Noah reached for the first page. His expression changed before he finished reading. Then he read another. And another. "These are notices to renew share claims," he said. Maddie felt the room tighten around them. Noah looked toward the door, as if Pete himself might be standing outside. They were never sent. Inez's face went pale. "He had them? He had access," Noah said carefully. "If we can show these were held back while he moved the sale forward, changes the argument." Maddie stared at the bundle. Until then, Pete had been cruel, selfish, loud. This was quieter, worse in a way. This was not laughter at a market table. Houston. This was erasing names before those women had a chance to speak. The night before the hearing, they worked under the bare bulb until the papers were sorted into a line even Noah could trust. Maddie did not sleep much. When morning came, she carried the ledger herself. The hearing room was smaller than she expected. Pete sat on one side with his folder of sale papers, looking almost relaxed. He smiled when Maddie came in with Inez, Noah, Helen. "That all?" he asked softly. Maddie did not answer. At first, Pete sounded reasonable. He spoke about taxes, maintenance, buyers, timing, practical decisions, feast. He said the orchard could not be held hostage by sentimental scraps from an old kitchen. He said no one had stepped forward for years. He said a responsible manager had to act. Then Noah laid out the ledger. P.T.'s smile thinned, but it stayed. Kitchen notes, Pete said. Nothing more. Noah placed Helen's label beside the ledger. Then the receipts. Then the coated jar lids. The room remained quiet. Finally, Helen stood. She did not look at Pete. She looked at Maddie, then at the open ledger. My fruit is in that book, she said. My label is on that table. And Caroline never treated it like scraps. Pete shifted in his chair, picked up the bundle of unsent notices, and placed it in front of him. Then maybe Mr. Collins can explain, Noah said, his voice calm. Why the women in that ledger were never given these, Bess. Pete looked at the papers as if they had been placed in the wrong room. For the first time since Maddie had come home, he did not have an answer ready. His hand moved toward the folder in front of him, then stopped. The room was quiet enough for Maddie to hear Inez draw in a breath beside her. The clerk asked him to respond. P straightened in his chair. Old papers get misplaced, he said. That doesn't make a conspiracy. Did not raise his voice. No one said conspiracy. We're asking why notices tied to these share claims were kept in the estate file while the sale was being pushed forward. They weren't worth anything. Did he come and feel? Helen's chair scraped lightly against the floor. They were worth enough for Caroline to write our names down, she said. Pete turned toward her. For a moment, the old habit came back to his face. The same look he had used at the market. The look that expected a woman to lower her eyes and let him finish. Helen did not lower hers. One by one, the pages were reviewed. A ledger, the labels, the receipts, the unsent notices. It did not happen like a thunderclap. It happened slowly, the way a door opens, after being swollen shut for years. Each paper gave the next paper weight. Each small amount gave a name, a place to stand. Maddie kept both hands folded in her lap. She had imagined victory as a rush of relief, but what she felt was quieter and harder to carry. Financial. Her mother's handwriting was being read aloud in a county room, and the woman people had called foolish was becoming clear line by line. When the decision came, nobody cheered. P.T. was removed as temporary manager of the estate. Fecal could not move forward under his control. The share teams would be reviewed and protected before any future decision about the orchard or the shed. Until that review was complete, the land and building would remain in place. Inez covered her mouth with one hand. Helen sat very still. Maddie looked at Pete, but he would not look back. He gathered his papers with clumsy, angry movements. Now, the papers did not seem to belong to him. By the time he left the room, no one followed. There was no shouting, no grand apology, no scene big enough to match the hurt he had caused. Just the sound of a door closing and the knowledge that he no longer held the keys to everyone else's future. For a few weeks after that, the orchard did not look saved. It looked like work. The taxes still had to be handled. The shed still needed cleaning. The old equipment had to be checked, the shelves repaired, the records copied, and every woman in the ledger contacted with care. He learned quickly that winning the right to keep something that was not the same as knowing how to carry it. One afternoon, she stood in the shed with Noah, staring at the open ledger and a stack of clean forms. We can make it simple, he said. Clear records. Written shares. No guessing. No one has to rely on memory again. Maddie nodded, but her eyes were on the old handwriting. I don't want to turn it into something too big. Then don't. That was the advice she kept. The shed reopened small. Inez came back first, tying on her apron with hands that trembled only once. Ellen brought 2 baskets from her farm and set them on the table like a woman placing a claim, not making a donation. Others came slower, some with fruit, some with recipes, some with only time and tired hands. He wrote every name down, not initials. Names. The first board went up inside the shed near the work table. It was plain wood, sanded smooth, with neat rows painted across it. Noah had helped draft the wording. Maddie wrote the names herself. Helen Price, Inez Walker, the other women from the ledger. And at the top, not larger than the rest, but not hidden either, Caroline May Collins. When Inez saw it, she turned away for a moment. "You should have said something sooner," she whimpered. Maddie stood beside her. "You're saying it now." Outside, the orchard had begun to sound like a place with a future again. Crates moved, lids clicked, fiend. Women talked over the sink and the long tables. No one spoke of getting rich. No one promised the shed would become famous. They spoke instead of what could be made, what could be sold, what could be shared, the end. And what had to be written down so no one could erase it later. Petit's name faded from the talk in town faster than Maddie expected. He had lost the authority he had used to press the sale. With it, the easy respect people had given him. He left quietly after the review began, taking with him the kind of pride that had never known what to do when paper stopped protecting it. Near closing time on the first day, Maddie stayed behind to wipe the work table. The room smelled of warm fruit, vinegar, and clean wood. On the shelf by the window sat one of the old coated jars, empty now, washed and left where the light could find it. Biddy picked it up and turned it. In her hands, for years, those little marks had looked like nothing. Now she knew they had been names waiting for someone to read them properly. She set the jar beneath the board, under her mother's name. Then she turned off the light over the table, leaving the door open a little longer while the last gold of the evening crossed the floor.